There was a time when their names filled arenas, their voices ruled radio, and their faces were everywhere Nashville looked. But fame in country music is borrowed, and when the spotlight fades, it rarely leaves mercy behind. In this video, we revisit 10 country legends who once had everything, only to lose it all when the industry moved on. These are not comeback stories. These are the quiet endings no one likes to remember. Image, Spade Cooley. In the 1940s, Spade Cooley wasn't just a successful musician. He was the face of Western swing on the West Coast. His orchestra rivaled Bob Wills, his records sold in massive numbers, and his television show reached millions of homes across California. At his peak, Cooley embodied everything Nashville believed country music could become: polished, profitable, and endlessly marketable. For a time, the spotlight never left him. But behind the fame was a volatile and controlling personality that grew darker as his power increased. As musical tastes shifted in the early 1950s and Western swing began to fade, Cooley's influence quietly weakened. The industry that once relied on him no longer needed him, and without the protection of fame, his private life began to surface in horrifying ways. In 1961, Spade Cooley was convicted of brutally murdering his wife, Allan Coe, in front of their teenage daughter. The trial shocked the public, but Nashville's response was swift and absolute. His name vanished from radio, television, and official country music history almost overnight. Contracts were canceled, royalties dried up, former collaborators refused to speak his name. The man who once ruled California country was now an embarrassment the industry wanted erased. Cooley died in 1969, not as a celebrated pioneer, but as a disgraced figure whose music had been quietly removed from the narrative of country music's evolution. There were no tributes, no retrospectives, no attempt at redemption. His recordings survived only through collectors and historians willing to separate the art from the crime. What makes Spade Cooley's story especially chilling is not just how he fell, but how completely he was erased. The spotlight didn't simply fade. It was turned off on purpose. His legacy became a cautionary tale buried beneath silence, proving that in country music, fame offers no forgiveness, and once the industry lets go, it never looks back. Image, Allan Coe. In the 1970s, Allan Coe stood at the raw, defiant edge of outlaw country. While others flirted with rebellion, Coe lived it. His songs pushed boundaries Nashville was afraid to touch, and his image, unfiltered, confrontational, unapologetic, made him a cult hero. At his peak, he was selling records, touring relentlessly, and shaping a movement that promised freedom from the industry's polished rules. But outlaw country came with a cost. Coe's refusal to compromise didn't just alienate executives. It slowly closed doors that never reopened. As radio tightened its grip on what was acceptable, his work was pushed further into the margins. Controversial material and erratic management decisions damaged his commercial standing, and contracts that once seemed guaranteed quietly disappeared. Unlike artists who faded gracefully, Coe never softened, and Nashville never forgave. By the late 1980s and 1990s, the industry that had once capitalized on his rebellion treated him as a liability. Royalties dwindled. Legal disputes over publishing and ownership drained what income remained. Stories began to surface of unpaid bills, canceled tours, and a lifestyle sustained more by survival than success. What followed was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow erosion. Coe continued performing, not in arenas, but in small clubs, biker rallies, and independent venues far removed from the spotlight he once commanded. He sold merchandise personally, relied on direct fan support, and lived with ongoing financial instability. Fame never disappeared completely, but its rewards did. Allan Coe's story isn't about a single fatal mistake. It's about what happens when an artist builds an identity too wild for the system that profits from it, and then outlives the moment that system was willing to tolerate. The spotlight didn't leave him suddenly. It receded inch by inch until only the songs remained. He became a legend without security, a pioneer without protection. Proof that in country music, independence can cost everything once the industry decides it no longer needs you. Image, Stonewall Jackson. In the late 1950s and 1960s, Stonewall Jackson was one of Nashville's most dependable hitmakers. With a voice rooted in honky-tonk tradition and songs that connected instantly with working-class listeners, he delivered chart-topping singles and became a familiar presence on the Grand Ole Opry. At his peak, Jackson wasn't chasing trends. He was the sound country radio relied on. But country music was changing faster than he was willing to follow. As the industry pushed towards slicker production and crossover appeal, Jackson remained firmly anchored in traditional storytelling. What once made him authentic slowly made him expendable. Radio support softened, promotion weakened, and without warning, the spotlight began to drift elsewhere. The real blow came not from fading popularity, but from business decisions made behind closed doors. Jackson later claimed that he was denied royalties he was contractually owed, alleging systematic underpayment that left him financially vulnerable just as his career slowed. When he pushed back, Nashville didn't negotiate, it distanced itself. Opportunities dried up, doors closed quietly, without explanation. By the 1970s, Stonewall Jackson was no longer a priority for labels or promoters. Performances became sporadic, income shrank. The industry that once depended on his voice now treated him as part of an older chapter it preferred not to revisit. While newer stars thrived, Jackson faced mounting financial strain with little institutional support. What followed was a long, quiet struggle. Jackson suffered a debilitating stroke that left him partially paralyzed, effectively ending his ability to perform. Medical costs mounted. His remaining income proved insufficient. For a man whose songs once dominated the charts, survival became the focus, not legacy. Stonewall Jackson died in 2011, remembered fondly by hardcore fans, but largely absent from mainstream country retrospectives. There were no grand tributes, no industry reckoning over how one of its reliable voices was left behind. His story reveals a harsh truth at the heart of country music. Loyalty flows one way. When the sound changes and the charts move on, even proven hitmakers can be left without protection. Jackson didn't fall because of scandal or excess. He fell because the spotlight moved and never came back. Image: Lefty Frizzell. In the early 1950s, Lefty Frizzell changed the sound of country music forever. His relaxed phrasing, emotional drawl, and conversational delivery rewrote how singers approached melody. Artists like Merle Haggard and George Jones openly modeled their careers on him. For a brief, blazing moment, Frizzell wasn't just successful, he was revolutionary. But influence doesn't always translate into stability. As his impact spread, Lefty's personal life began to unravel. Heavy drinking became a constant companion, and discipline, both musical and financial, slipped away. While younger artists borrowed his style and climbed the charts, Frizzell struggled to maintain the momentum he had created. By the late 1950s, Nashville's attention had shifted. The industry wanted reliability, clean images, and consistent touring schedules. Lefty offered none of those. Missed shows, erratic behavior, and declining chart performance quietly pushed him to the edges of the business. Contracts weakened, advances shrank. The spotlight that once followed him everywhere began to flicker. Financial problems soon followed. Despite his enormous influence, Frizzell had little protection when income slowed. Royalties were inconsistent, savings were minimal, and management decisions earlier in his career left him vulnerable. As his health deteriorated from years of alcohol abuse, medical bills added pressure he could no longer handle. By the early 1970s, Lefty Frizzell was no longer a star. He was a cautionary memory. He continued to record sporadically, but the industry had moved on, content to celebrate his influence while offering little practical support. The man who shaped modern country singing found himself isolated, weakened, and struggling to stay afloat. Lefty Frizzell died in 1975 at just 47 years old. His passing was met with respect, but not rescue. The legacy remained. The protection never came. Today, his voice lives on through others, while his own ending serves as a reminder of how quickly pioneers can be left behind once their usefulness fades. He didn't lose everything because he lacked talent. He lost it because the industry took what he gave and walked away when the cost became inconvenient. Image: Johnny Paycheck. For a brief moment in the late 1970s, Johnny Paycheck had one of the most recognizable voices in American music. Take This Job and Shove It wasn't just a hit, it was a working-class anthem that cemented him as a symbol of defiance and blue-collar pride. Radio played him endlessly, Venues filled up fast, and Nashville knew exactly how profitable his anger could be. But Paycheck's personal life was as volatile as his music. Long before fame arrived, he had battled addiction, legal trouble, and self-destructive impulses. Success didn't calm those demons, it amplified them. As touring intensified and pressure grew, substance abuse followed him everywhere, eroding reliability and trust behind the scenes. By the early 1980s, his relationship with the industry had begun to fracture. Missed appearances, erratic behavior, and growing legal issues made labels nervous. Then came the moment that permanently altered his trajectory. A shooting incident in 1985 that resulted in a prison sentence. In Nashville, incarceration wasn't just a scandal, it was a career death sentence. When Paycheck was released, the spotlight was gone. Radio had moved on. Promoters hesitated. Contracts were smaller, conditional, and unforgiving. Though he attempted a comeback in the 1990s and regained some artistic respect, the financial damage had already been done. Royalties were inconsistent, debts lingered, and medical problems piled up. In his final years, Johnny Paycheck was still performing, but the scale had collapsed. Casinos, small halls, and independent bookings replaced the national tours of his peak. Much of his income went toward survival rather than security. The man who once voiced the frustration of millions struggled to maintain stability in his own life. Paycheck died in 2003, respected by fans and fellow musicians, yet far from the wealth his success once promised. There were tributes, but no correction of the damage done. His story wasn't one of sudden ruin, but of a long, grinding descent, where every mistake cost more than the last. Johnny Paycheck lost everything, not because he lacked talent, but because the industry demands control, and he was never built to live inside it. When the spotlight faded, it didn't return with mercy. It simply moved on. Image, Hank Thompson. For more than a decade, Hank Thompson was one of the safest bets in country music. In the 1950s and early 1960s, his smooth blend of honky-tonk and western swing dominated the charts. With the Brazos Valley Boys behind him, Thompson delivered hit after hit, becoming one of Capitol Records' most reliable stars. He wasn't controversial. He wasn't reckless. He was profitable, and Nashville loved him for it. At his peak, Thompson sold millions of records and toured relentlessly. His sound fit perfectly into an era when country music valued polish without abandoning roots. But the very stability that made him successful also made him vulnerable. When musical trends began shifting toward harder-edged honky-tonk and later toward country-politan crossover sounds, Thompson's style was suddenly labeled dated. Unlike younger artists who adapted or reinvented themselves, Thompson stayed loyal to the formula that had once worked. The charts responded by slowly turning away. Radio play declined. Promotion softened. New contracts were less generous. There was no dramatic fall, just a steady withdrawal of industry interest. By the late 1960s, Hank Thompson was no longer a priority. Touring opportunities shrank, and the large venues that once welcomed him stopped calling. Though he had enjoyed years of success, the financial infrastructure to protect aging artists simply didn't exist. Royalties alone weren't enough to sustain the lifestyle fame had created, and long-term security proved elusive. As the spotlight moved on, Thompson retreated from the mainstream almost entirely. He continued performing occasionally, but far from the center of the industry he once helped define. Unlike legends who died young and were mythologized, Thompson lived long enough to watch his relevance disappear in real time. He died in 2007, respected by historians, but largely absent from modern country conversations. There were acknowledgments of his influence, but no widespread rediscovery. His story reflects a quieter truth. You don't need scandal or excess to lose everything. Sometimes, all it takes is time. Hank Thompson did everything right and still found himself pushed aside when the music changed. In country music, even consistency has an expiration date. When the spotlight faded, it didn't collapse his life overnight. It simply left him standing in the dark. Image, Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe Shaver was never meant to be a star in the traditional sense. His gift wasn't polish or radio-friendly charm. It was truth. In the 1970s, his songwriting became the backbone of outlaw country, recorded by artists who would go on to earn fortunes and lasting fame. Willie Nelson's Honky Tonk Heroes alone cemented Shaver's reputation as one of the most authentic voices Nashville had ever seen. But while others prospered, Shaver barely survived. Poor contracts, limited publishing control, and a deep distrust of the business side of music meant that much of the money his songs generated never reached him. He lived hand to mouth even as his words fueled careers far larger than his own. Recognition came easily. Financial security never did. Life outside the studio was equally unforgiving. Shaver battled addiction, health problems, and relentless personal tragedy. He lost his son, Eddie Shaver, a gifted guitarist and frequent collaborator, to a drug overdose, a blow that nearly destroyed him. Any momentum his late career revival might have had dissolved into grief and isolation. Despite his legendary status among musicians, Billy Joe Shaver spent years without stable housing, reliable health care, or consistent income. He relied on small gigs, benefit shows, and the generosity of friends who understood his importance but couldn't undo decades of neglect. The industry praised his honesty, but rarely paid for it. In later years, Shaver became a symbol of outlaw authenticity, invited to festivals and documentaries as living proof of a realer era. Yet even then, the attention was symbolic. The structural support that might have offered comfort or security never materialized. He was celebrated just enough to be remembered, but not enough to be protected. Billy Joe Shaver died in 2020, revered by peers and critics, yet far from wealthy. His songs remain cornerstones of country music history, but his life tells a harsher story. Songwriting alone does not guarantee survival. In an industry built on storytelling, Shaver lived one of the most painful truths of all, that the people who give the music its soul are often the ones left behind when the spotlight fades. Image, Wilf Carter. Long before Nashville became the center of country music, Wilf Carter, known to American audiences as Montana Slim, was already a star. In the 1930s and 1940s, his clear yodel, cowboy imagery, and frontier ballads helped define what early country music sounded like. His records sold in huge numbers, his radio presence stretched across borders, and for a generation of listeners, Carter was country music. At his peak, Wilf Carter enjoyed a level of fame that few artists of his era could imagine. He toured constantly, recorded prolifically, and influenced countless singers who followed. But the industry he helped build was still young and unforgiving. Contracts offered little long-term protection. Royalties were poorly structured, and artists were expected to keep moving or be forgotten. As musical tastes evolved after World War II, Carter's style began to feel old-fashioned. The rise of honky-tonk, followed by rock and roll, pushed yodeling cowboy songs out of the mainstream almost overnight. Radio moved on. Promoters stopped calling. The spotlight that once followed him everywhere simply vanished. Unlike later stars, Carter had no modern safety net. There were no legacy tours, no revival circuits, no industry programs to preserve pioneers. Income from recordings dwindled to almost nothing. Though respected in hindsight, he spent long stretches living modestly, far removed from the success his name once carried. In his later years, Wilf Carter returned to Canada, largely absent from the American country narrative he had helped shape. Recognition came in fragments, an occasional award, a brief mention in historical retrospectives, but not in ways that restored financial security. Fame, it turned out, did not age well. Carter died in 1996. Honored as a foundational figure, yet unknown to much of the modern audience. His influence survived, his comfort did not. What makes his story especially sobering is how quietly it ended. There was no scandal, no collapse, no dramatic downfall, only time, change, and neglect. Wilf Carter lost everything, not because he failed, but because the industry evolved past him and never looked back. His story exposes one of country music's oldest truths. Being first doesn't mean being remembered, and building the foundation doesn't guarantee a place in the house once the spotlight fades. Image, Dale Evans. For a time, Dale Evans represented the brightest version of American optimism. As the wife and on-screen partner of Roy Rogers, she became one of the most recognizable faces in Western entertainment. Her singing voice, wholesome image, and constant media presence made her a household name. In the 1940s and 1950s, Evans wasn't just famous. She was trusted, admired, and everywhere. But the image came with a cost few saw. Behind the smiles and studio contracts was a woman navigating relentless pressure, rigid expectations, and a private life marked by repeated tragedy. As Western films lost popularity and television tastes changed, the roles that once sustained her career slowly disappeared. The spotlight didn't shatter, it dimmed, year by year. The real collapse came through personal loss. Evans endured the deaths of multiple children, including a daughter who passed away shortly after birth due to severe disabilities, an event that deeply affected her emotionally and financially. Medical expenses, reduced income, and the gradual decline of Western entertainment strained the family's resources far more than the public realized. Though she and Roy Rogers were icons, their wealth was not limitless. As opportunities dried up, maintaining the lifestyle associated with fame became increasingly difficult. Evans turned to writing and speaking engagements, not as creative pivots, but as necessities. The industry that once paid her to embody perfection offered little support once she no longer fit its needs. In later years, Dale Evans lived far more modestly than audiences would have imagined. While still respected, she was no longer central to the entertainment machine. Invitations became occasional. Attention became selective. The security people assumed she had simply wasn't there. When Evans died in 2001, tributes focused on her faith and positivity, not on the quiet financial and emotional toll fame had taken. Her story challenges the illusion that success in country-adjacent entertainment guaranteed lifelong comfort. Even those who played America's idealized heroes could be left managing loss, largely on their own. Dale Evans didn't lose everything through scandal or excess. She lost it through time, change, and a system that had little use for yesterday's symbols. When the spotlight faded, what remained was resilience, but not protection. Image, Tom T. Hall. For much of the late 1960s and 1970s, Tom T. Hall was one of country music's most respected voices. Known as the storyteller, he built a career on plain-spoken songs about ordinary people, factory workers, forgotten drifters, small-town lives rarely romanticized by Nashville. His records sold well, his lyrics earned deep respect, and his influence reached far beyond chart positions. Yet Hall's relationship with the industry was always uneasy. As country music moved toward image-driven marketing and polished crossover appeal, his refusal to simplify or soften his storytelling placed him increasingly at odds with Nashville's priorities. He valued honesty over hits, meaning over momentum. Over time, that independence came at a price. By the 1980s, Hall began to withdraw from the mainstream. Radio play declined. Promotional support faded. Rather than fight the system, he stepped away, a decision that preserved his integrity but weakened his financial footing. Unlike artists who benefited from constant touring and brand reinvention, Hall chose distance, trusting that respect would outlast relevance. It didn't. As years passed, his catalog generated less income than expected. Royalties were modest. Touring opportunities shrank. While newer generations of fans discovered his work academically, the industry offered little practical support. Hall lived quietly, far removed from the spotlight he once commanded. In his later years, he became increasingly reclusive, openly critical of the modern music business, and uncomfortable with its priorities. His withdrawal wasn't dramatic, but it was complete. Fame had given him a voice, but not security. The man who chronicled the lives of America's overlooked found himself slowly becoming one of them. Tom T. Hall died in 2021, honored by fellow musicians, but largely absent from contemporary country conversations. There were tributes, but no rediscovery that changed his final chapter. His story is not one of collapse, but of quiet erosion, where artistic integrity outlives commercial relevance. Hall lost everything, not through scandal or excess, but through choice. And in country music, choosing honesty over visibility often means watching the spotlight fade.